Hello, everyone. My name is Lily Naz, and I want to welcome you today to our second of six, I believe, sessions with Dr. Berman, Resurrection and Reincarnation, two central Jewish teachings and their meaning for today with Dr. Nathaniel Berman.
Okay, good evening, everybody. Welcome back to Resurrection and Reincarnation, to the hardy souls who are willing to take on these most challenging topics, challenging to the modern imagination. And what we're going to do tonight is we're going to continue our effort to understand how these teachings are relevant, are existentially urgent, they are existentially meaningful to people in 2022. Even for those of you who grew up not necessarily believing in these ideas or being taught that they were not important in Judaism or that they were best left unspoken about. And we're going to look at them, both their centrality within the Jewish tradition and their deep meaning for today. And I should preface this that one of the themes of tonight is the body, is the way in which these teachings specifically about resurrection, which is our second session tonight on resurrection, it's really about the body, but understanding the self as embodied. And this is a very old idea in human history, but it's also a very current idea. I'd say over the last century, probably, we've really returned to the idea of really understanding human beings as embodied and away from the idea that a human being is basically just sort of an ethereal, disembodied intellect, something like that. And that's been a result of a number of different factors in modern culture. And it also enables us to rejoin some very old themes in human culture, and here specifically in the Jewish tradition. So I'm now going to share my screen. I'm going to put the PowerPoint up there, and we will embark on our journey. I will generally hold off the questions until maybe I'll pause now and again during the time and take questions. But generally, I sort of hold them either for the end or for breaks. Okay, here we go. And again, for those of you who weren't here last time, this image is from the Dura Europos synagogue in Syria in the 3rd century, and it's actually depicting the Ezekiel's vision of the Valley of the Dry Bones, which maybe we'll talk about eventually, not tonight. So we're going to begin as we began last time, or as we began sort of in the beginning last time, of looking at a passage from the Talmud, talking about the centrality of this belief in resurrection. So for those of you who are taught, well, Jews don't really believe in resurrection, that's really not true. So in the Talmud, it's a central belief. And for those of you who need a little background, the Talmud is the great compendium of Jewish law and folklore and mysticism and theology and morals and ethics and all sorts of things, recording the discussions of rabbis from about the 2nd century to about the 6th century of the Common Era. So this is a passage from the Talmud in the tractate on Rosh Hashanah, just to give you a sense of the centrality and the importance of this belief. And it's also interesting to see the context, the other beliefs that it's in which resurrection is embroidered. So it goes like this: the sectarians and the informers and the heretics who denied the Torah and denied the resurrection of the dead and separated from the ways of the community, and who cast their fear over the land of the living, and who sinned and caused the masses to sin, all of these descend to Gehenna. Gehenna is the most common word in the Jewish tradition for hell, and are punished there for generations and generations. And I just wanted to flag two things about this. One is, well, the end, obviously. It's really bad to deny the resurrection of the dead. at the end of days, it's a really bad thing. You descend to Gehenna and are punished there for generations and generations. The other thing to notice about it is the context. The people who deny the resurrection of the dead, they're grouped with people who deny the Torah. We actually saw that last week. But they're also grouped with other kinds of people, informers, people who separate from the ways of the community, people who cast their fear over the land of the living, maybe sort of rulers who are ruled by fear, people who sin and causes the masses to sin. All those groups are grouped with the people who deny the resurrection of the dead. And we could spend a lot of time talking about why this list? What do people in this list have in common? Something to think about. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it tonight, but something to think about how it's grouped. Denying the resurrection of the dead really puts you at odds with the community, with the tradition, with the society, and you're like an informer. You're like someone who is a tyrant, and it's really interesting to see how they understood this. Okay, I just thought that would get us in the mood. In case you're wondering whether it was important, it's really, really important. Essential Jewish teaching, as I say in the title of this course. Okay. The dew of lights, which is a lovely poetic phrase, and it comes from a verse in Isaiah. And this verse in Isaiah is one of the few verses in the Hebrew Bible, in the Tanakh, that could be plausibly interpreted as gesturing towards the resurrection of the dead at the end of days. It's not clear that's what Isaiah means here. It's also not clear whether the dew of lights is the right translation, but that's the way it's been interpreted in later Jewish tradition. And this is, again, Isaiah 26:19, from the translation from Robert Alter, which I've slightly modified in keeping with the way it's interpreted in later texts. Yichyu meitecha, I'm just going to read in Hebrew just because it's a lovely poetic verse, and I'll read in English. Yichyu meitecha nivelati kumun, hakitzu v'rananu shochne afar, kital orot talecha, va'aretz refaim tapil. Your dead shall live, their corpses rise. The dwellers in the dust shall wake and sing gladly. For your dew is a dew of lights, and the netherworld releases the shades. And the shades here in the sense of ghosts. Now, there's nothing about this verse that's easy to translate, and there are many different translations of it. This translation is really in keeping with the way it's interpreted in later tradition. It's a really beautiful verse. You can imagine turning this into a song. It's not obvious that it refers to the resurrection of the dead. It could be referring metaphorically to the revival of the people of Israel. But maybe that's what it meant in context when the author of Isaiah wrote it. But certainly in later Jewish tradition, it's very explicitly interpreted as about the resurrection of the dead at the end of days. Your dew is a dew of lights, right? And that line here becomes very, very important in later Jewish interpretations. It's really just a beautiful verse. Now, here is a mention of it, very short passage from a late midrashic text called the Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, the chapters of Rabbi Eliezer. It's a midrashic text written probably around the 9th century of the Common Era. It's an amazing book, one of our most, before Kabbalah, it's one of the most mythologically audacious books in the tradition. And this is just a very short little excerpt. In the future to come, that's a standard word for at the end of days, le'atid lavo, the Blessed Holy One brings down the revivifying dew and revives the dead. As it says, your dead shall live, their corpses rise, quoting the verse in Isaiah that we just read. So here we see that this verse in Isaiah, this beautiful poetic verse, right? They try to understand what is this reference to the dew in the second half of the verse. Well, they interpret as that there's some kind of dew that falls upon the dead at the end of days and revives them. Your dew is a dew of lights, tal orot, and the netherworld releases the shades, the ghosts. Eretz Raphaim Tapil. And that's how they bring it together. Okay, now, this is something we talked about last time. For those of you who are synagogue goers, this is the second blessing of the Amidah, the central portion of the Jewish liturgy that observant Jews recite 3 times a day. And it goes like this. This is just an excerpt from it. You are eternally mighty, Lord. You revive the dead. You have great power to save. And then in the winter and the summer, there are different, you say different things. In the winter, you say you make the wind blow and the rain fall. Mashiva ruach umridat Hashem. That's what we're saying now. In the summer, you say you bring the dew, muridat tal. You sustain the living with kindness. You revive the dead with great compassion. You support the fallen, heal the sick, set the captives free, and keep faith with those who sleep in the dust. And I think that we talked about this last time. If you weren't here last time, this is, and you're familiar with the liturgy, this is a very familiar passage. And you can see now how it directly derives from this verse in Isaiah. So the second blessing of the Amidah, which observant Jews recite 3 times a day, really derives its inspiration from this verse in Isaiah and interprets it as very clearly as about resurrection of the dead at the end of days. And the fact that we recite this praise of God for bringing the rain and the dew, why is it in this blessing? Well, it's in this blessing in part because of this midrash that says it's the dew that revives the dead. We had a different interpretation of its presence in this blessing last time, but I think it really does make sense when you look at it now. It really derives from that verse in Isaiah about the resurrection of the dead. And again, for those of you who engage in traditional Jewish prayer, something to think about. Think very carefully about this second blessing. That's usually sort of gone through very quickly or sung with a very jaunty tune, but it's really about the resurrection of the dead. And this insertion of the thing about the dew and the rain has to do with this connection from Isaiah. Okay. I feel like I wasn't present enough last time. It was too much in my PowerPoint. So I just want to say hello again. We're now about to embark on really mystical stuff, okay? And so I just want us all to take a deep breath. Okay. Now the reason I wanted to stop for a moment, right, is this. I started off tonight with a very stern teaching from the Talmud, saying this is something you really have to believe in. Otherwise, you're going to go to hell. It really does literally say that. And whether or not you're a Talmudic kind of Jew, it's something to take seriously. You're from the Jewish tradition, it's something to really take seriously. These stern warnings from the rabbis, this is something that is central. And what I want to do now is appeal to your imaginations, right? Appeal to your imaginations. There was a time in Western culture, say in the 18th, 19th century, when those sort of modern people in those eras, they wanted to be rationalists. They didn't want to believe in anything supernatural, anything that defied, the emerging natural science. I think from the 20th century onward, we've come to appreciate again the power of the imagination, and the importance of the imagination in our lives, and also the importance of our bodies, and the importance of not thinking of human beings as pure intellect, or in the religious vein as pure soul, as disembodied. And that thinking about the body, again, has come back through from a variety of reasons. One reason is simply science. If the rationalism of the 18th century viewing human beings as pure thought, when Descartes says, I think, therefore I am, right? In a way, it's a secularized version of a religious conception which sees people as pure souls. In a way, paradoxically, through science, it's the scientific worldview really negates that kind of mind-body or soul-body dualism and situates ourselves again in our bodies, that we are embodied beings, right? That's one source of it. There are other sources of it as well. I mean, in more recent, say in the past half century, I'd say the main source is feminism. And feminism has really criticized the mind-body distinction as a very gender distinction in which minds are viewed as male and bodies as female, and that the mind-body dualism in Western culture in its religious or secular forms is really bound up with patriarchy in a variety of ways. It's another source of this rejection of this kind of dualism and resituating ourselves in our bodies, and also from various other cultural sources, a variety of cultural sources. And what I want to say to you tonight is that paradoxically, perhaps, this resituating of human existence in the body enables us to appreciate these ancient texts and these pre-scientific myths of resurrection and reincarnation, and the impossibility of thinking of ourselves as pure disembodiment, but as always embodied. And if we think of ourselves as continuing after this lifetime in any form, whether it's in the memories of our loved ones or wherever, we have to think of it as embodied. And I think these ancient texts, whether or not you quote unquote believe in them, whatever that means, they provide meaning for understanding our embodiment. And these texts are embodied text. Okay? Now, so I want you to situate yourselves in your bodies and in your imaginations. Suspend all disbelief, at least for the next 40 minutes, and embark with me on some of these journeys. So the first topic here is the mysteries of luz. Now, luz is a word that appears in the Hebrew Bible as a place name. It also is, that could be the word for an almond or some kind of nut. So the mysteries of luz, I call this immortal city, bone of resurrection. Okay, here we go. This is from the Talmud again, and it is a riff of a story in the book of Judges. When the Israelites, they besiege a city, and there's one man from this city who comes out of the city and basically helps the Israelites conquer his own city. And the Israelites then kill everyone in the city. They kill everyone in the city. And he escapes. And you can imagine if he's viewed as a traitor, they might want to escape. But the main thing I think for our purposes, and the way the story is read here in the tradition, is that he's a sole survivor. He's the sole survivor, maybe with his family, but he's really the sole survivor of a city, all of whom were killed. They were all killed, except for this one unnamed man. Okay, and you can look up the story. It's the first chapter of the book of Judges. He's the sole survivor, the one who wasn't killed, the one who didn't die. And that's very important for the way this verse is used, both in the Talmud and then later in Kabbalah. So it says, this man, after being the sole survivor of this city, he went to the land of the Hittites and he built a city, and he called its name Luz. That is its name to this day. And it's again from the book of Judges. Now the Talmud comments. Listen to what it says when they say, what is this city, Luz? This is the city, Luz, where they dye the tchelet. And the tchelet is a very important dye in Jewish ritual. It used to dye the fringes of a talit. Some people do it. Some people think we don't really know what it is. But anyway, it's supposed to be used in a talit. That's the commandment of using a talit of tzitzit, these ritual fringes. There's one of string is supposed to be dyed the color tchelet. It's purple or blue. Very, very important. Also, the high priest would wear something made of tchelet on his forehead. It's a mystical color, a mystical dye. So this is the city Luz where they dye the tchelet. And it was a special, maybe a special worm that they used or something, but it's a special skill that is very esoteric. Now, more interestingly, or more importantly for us, it is the same city, Luz, where Sancherib came and did not overturn it. Now, Sancherib was a king of the Assyrians, who came and conquered the Middle East, and the Talmud says that he came and he mixed up all the peoples, and he, so that you couldn't tell who was who. And it says this city, Luz, when Sancherib came, he didn't overturn it. Actually, the word is lo bilbala. He didn't confuse it. He didn't mix it all up. He didn't exile its people and bring other people in and mix everybody together. Somehow it resisted Sancherib. Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, the destroyer of Judea, came to Luz and did not destroy it. The city has this resistance quality to it. It retains its identity from Sancherib. It retains its existence from Nebuchadnezzar. And then it says that even the angel of death has no permission to pass through it. So no one dies in Luz. Rather, its elders, when their minds have reached the end, a phrase in the Talmud that's a little bit hard to translate, Shedatan katsa alehen, some translate it when they've decided it's time to die, something like that. They go outside the city wall and die because they can't die in the city. The city is a city it's an immortal city. Okay. Now, this myth of Luz is an incredible myth, right? It's this idea that there's something that's immortal. There's something that resists all destructive forces, right? In a world of destruction, in a world of evil, in a world of misery, there's something that resists. And I think we all believe that, right? And here we have this idea that there is a city called Luz, founded by the sole survivor of a city that was slaughtered, because all of whose inhabitants slaughtered, he was the sole survivor. He built the city, which is a city of immortality. It cannot be confused by Sancherib. It cannot be destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar, and even the angel of death has no power over it. And the people of the city seem to have such wisdom that they know when it's time, when their time has come. And when that time has come, they exit the city walls and they die there because they don't die in Luz. Incredible. I even now, I mean, I've thought about this myth for many years. Even now, as I'm telling the story, I'm getting shivers up and down my spine. What an amazing, imaginative story we have here. Now, why am I telling you this story? Because, did I ever these things? No, okay. Because this word Luz is also used to refer to the immortal bone in the human body. And it's the bone that doesn't rot and from which God resurrects us at the end of days. And here's this amazing little story about it. And it's about a dialogue between the Emperor Hadrian, the evil Roman emperor, who was responsible for much destruction of the Jewish people in the 2nd century after one of the revolts. And he's having a dialogue with one of the Talmudic sages. Whether this actually took place or not is, I leave it to your imagination. But it's very interesting. It says, Hadrian, may his bones rot. Now, this may his bones rot is just a thing that is said about an evil person. It's like today we might say, somebody mentions the Nazis. Somebody might say, Yimach shmam zichram, which means may their name and their memory be erased, right? That's what we tend to say about really evil people. So they say, may his bones rot. But in this context, it actually takes on a different kind of meaning here because of what is about to be said. Hadrian, may his bones rot, asked Rabbi Joshua ben Hananiah. From where will the Blessed Holy One raise human beings to blossom forth in the future to come, in the end of days? From where will he raise the dead? In the human body, from the Luz of the spinal column, he replied. Now, this is a bone in the spinal column that is a little bit of disagreement, of course. about which bone this is. Some think it's a bone really at the base of the spine, the sacrum. Others think it's a bone higher up near the brain. So even that disagreement is really significant. Is it the highest or the lowest is really significant. Maybe it's about the dialogue between the high and the low. So he says from the loos of the spinal column. And I just look at this thing on the screen, right? Because what it says in the Hebrew is, when this thing I translate as raise human beings to blossom forth, in the Hebrew, that's one word, matzitz et ha'adam. Matzitz, it's from the word tzitz, which means bud, the buds that appear in the spring. So the idea here is that the resurrection of the dead, people, it's like there's a plant is dormant in the winter, and then there are buds in the spring, and then it blossoms. And that's that verb. It's the word bud turned into a verb, right? That is used here. That the time of the resurrection of the dead is understood as like the springtime of human beings, when their dormant state buds forth, will become like buds, and then God produces a whole human being. And where does this budding come from? It's from the loos. It's that one bone that is the secret of resurrection. And let's see what he says here. How do you know that, he asked. And the rabbi says, bring me one and I will prove it to you. So Rabbi Joshua threw it into the fire, yet it was not burnt. He put it in water, but it did not dissolve. He ground it between millstones, but it was not crushed. He placed it on an anvil and smote it with a hammer. The anvil was cleft and the hammer split, yet it remained intact. The loos bone remained intact. And that's the proof that the loos bone is immortal. It doesn't dissolve, right? And that's from that bone, that indestructible, immortal bone, it says that's where God caused the human being to bud and blossom again and to be reconstructed at the time of the resurrection of the dead, Tchiyat HaMitim, at the end of days. Okay. Now this loos, remember, it's also that survivor of the city that was slaughtered. It's the city in which no one dies, and it's the piece of a human being that's immortal, right? And I really want to focus on that idea, that here we have this idea, say, okay, the soul's immortal, but here we have the idea that a part of the body is immortal. And maybe that part of the body also contains part of the soul. The embodied self, again, something that sounds very mythical and very ancient, and yet very modern, very contemporary. If there's going to be resurrection, if there's immortality, it also must have to do with the body. And I've written this out, sort of that it looks like a poem, but I actually think it is a poem in the Hebrew. The cadences, even in the Hebrew, it has these cadences. He put it in water, but it did not dissolve. He ground it between millstones, but it was not crushed. The Hebrew is, and so forth. And at the end, התחיל מכה עליו בפטיש, נחלק הסדן, ונבקע הפטיש, ולא חסר כלום. It's like a poem about the loos bone. Okay. All right. Now, here, let's do a tiny little moment of cross-cultural thing. So this is a great article by this guy, Brian Strauss, who was a professor at the University of Texas, called The Mesoamerican Sacrum Bone, Doorway to the World, written in 2007, really terrific monograph. And he says, actually, the sacrum, he says, the sacrum, as the name suggests, is viewed as sacred in a lot of different cultures. He did research on Central America, but he also says this is also true in India and Egypt, and as we now learn in Jewish tradition, that it's something that is all over the world in unrelated cultures. The Native American cultures in Central America, unrelated to Egypt and India, let alone to the Talmud, right? There's something there. And, as he says, it's undoubtedly not through influence, but through independent reflection on the human body, or who knows. But I just wanted to put that out there, And he says, language and iconographic evidence strongly suggests that the sacrum bone was an important bone indeed in Mesoamerica, sort of in the Central American region, for Native American culture before the Europeans came, related to sacredness, to resurrection, and to fire. The importance attached to this bone and its immediate neighbors is not limited to Mesoamerica. From ancient Egypt to ancient India and elsewhere, there is abundant evidence that the bones at the base of the spine, including especially the sacrum, were seen as sacred. Okay, so now enough for comparative religion. Let's go back to the Zohar. Now remember, if people weren't here, very briefly, the Zohar is a vast collection of kabbalistic texts mostly written in Spain in the late 13th century in Aramaic, and written a highly literary style, recording the wanderings and the discussions of a group of sages whose names we mostly know from the Talmud, who were sages who lived mostly in the 2nd century in the land of Israel. And the stories and the content of the discussions are often have this really interesting reflection in relationship to each other. So here's the Zohar, written about, maybe 800 or so years after the Talmud, riffing off the Talmudic thing about the luz bone, but with a little story. Rabbi Chia was sitting one day by the gateway of the gate of Usha. He saw Rabbi Elazar with a large bird flying by him. He said to Rabbi Elazar, "This indicates that even when you are on the road, everyone yearns to follow you." He sees Rabbi Elazar being followed by a bird. He says, "Look, everyone's following you, even when you're walking on the road." Rabbi Elazar, turned his head and saw the bird. He looks at the bird and he says, "Surely it has a mission. For the Blessed Holy One accomplishes his mission through everything. He has so many messengers. And do not say only things with spirit, rather even things without spirit." Okay? And it's a certain way of living. If you can look around and you see a bird, you give it significance, right? You assume it has significance. It's a certain way of living, of understanding the world around you, and seeing God in everything, seeing God everywhere. Now, here at the end, he says, "Do not say only things with spirit, rather even those without spirit." And here is a very interesting turn here. He's not saying the bird doesn't have spirit. He's going to say actually, Danny Matt translates it not only animate things, even inanimate things, but I thought that was less poetic than the Aramaic, which really says things with spirit and things without spirit. In the Aramaic, it says, for those of you whose native language is Aramaic, and then it embarks on a homily about the miracle of Aaron's staff. So when God sends Moses and Aaron to talk to Pharaoh, he says to Aaron, take your staff, your stick, when you're in front of Pharaoh, and to prove to him that God sent you, and cast it on the ground, and it'll turn into a serpent. Okay? And that's what this is talking about. So an inanimate thing that becomes an animate thing. Rabbi Chia said, "Come and see. With a staff of dry wood, the Blessed Holy One performed the first of the miracles, accomplishing thereby two missions. One, it was a piece of dry wood, and temporarily it was animated, becoming a creature." And then Rabbi Elazar echoes this. "In Aaron's hand was a staff of dry wood, and the Blessed Holy One temporarily turned it into a creature with spirit and body." Now, those of you who are following along here with the rhythm, you know what's coming, right? Here we have something inanimate, a staff of dry wood, the emphasis on it being dry, right? It's something dead, right? And it becomes a creature with spirit and body. And you know what's coming if you've been, if you're sort of flowing with the exposition here over the last session and a half. And sure enough, now those bodies that had holy spirits and souls, in other words, human beings, who've died, those bodies that had holy spirits and souls observe the commandments of Torah, engaged in Torah day and night, and were concealed by the Blessed Holy One in the dust. In other words, they died and were buried. Later, when he joyously renews the world, how much more so will he transform them into new creatures? If he could do it with Aaron's staff, a piece of dry wood, how much more so can he do it to these beings who were once alive, engaged in holy acts? How much more so when he joyously renews the world at the end of days, will he transform them into new creatures? And this is, in a way, is an expansion of a Talmudic saying that we talked about last time. Rabbi Chia said to him, what is more, that very body that existed will arise. There won't be a new body. The very body that existed will arise, as is written, quoting Isaiah, your dead will live. And not he will create, in other words, not he will create new beings, but metecha yukumun, your dead will arise, implying that they already are creatures, but they will live. And now here's a reference to the myth of the loose bone. For one bone remains from the body beneath the earth, and that one never decays or wastes away in the dust. At that time, the Blessed Holy One will soften it and make it like the leaven in the dough. So the loose bone is like the leaven in the dough that makes the dough rise, right? That's why we eat unleavened bread on Pesach, because it doesn't have leaven, so it doesn't rise. But the leaven in the dough is what makes the dough come alive. It makes it rise. As everyone knows who bakes, leaven is alive. You can't pour boiling water on it, you'll kill it. You kill the yeast, right? You have to let it rise. It's a living thing that makes the dough come alive, rising, expanding the four directions, thereby forming the body and all its smooth members. Afterward, the Blessed Holy One will infuse spirit into them. Rebbe Lazar said, so it is. Come and see. How is that bone softened? By dew. As is written, quoting Isaiah, for your dew is a dew of lights. Now I'm going to pause here and everybody take a deep breath. It's this amazing idea. This idea that there's a part of the body that's immortal. There's a city that's immortal. There was a refugee, this man who escaped from the city, the sole refugee, who has a certain kind of immortality because every person in the city was slaughtered and he escaped, right? Fortunately, many of us know people. I mean, those of us of a certain age, I myself grew up in a community in which there was a very, very high percentage of Holocaust survivors. This idea of Sherit HaPleitav, the survivors, is something very real in many parts of the world and in our communities, very, very real, certainly in the era that I grew up in. This idea of something survives, something resists. Sancherib can't destroy it. Nebuchadnezzar can't destroy it. The angel of death has no power over it at a sort of social level. And then this one bone, this piece of our bodies that cannot be wiped out, and from which a new being can arise, can be like the leaven in the dough that can then, with the mystical dew from the heaven, can arise and become a new body. And this is like this incredible portrayal of Tchiat HaMetim, which the rabbis tell us you better believe in. So let me see if anybody's in comments, because I have another amazing passage. Somebody writes, great, Noah writes, I've always loved because of this that luz is the Spanish word for light. Okay, that is great. And of course, the people in the Talmud didn't speak Spanish, but the people who wrote the Zohar certainly did. That's really something to think about, Noah. Thank you for that comment. It really is something to think about. Other comments or questions?
I'm of a practical bend, so I hate to almost ask this because I'm going to bring it down, but I keep going back to that first passage, I think it was in the Talmud, where it starts to tell you that this man, this refugee, was the sole survivor and he built the city of Luz. But I feel like I'm missing a piece of that story, because why did he merit this? I mean, it seems like he gave up his entire city to be murdered, and he's getting this great reward, and he goes on and everything is wonderful and there's resurrection, and it's not balanced for me. Some piece is missing.
I'm with you. I mean, you know, it depends on how you feel about the Israelite conquest of the land of Canaan. If you think it was a good thing and it was divinely ordained, you think this guy performed a good deed, right? If you have sort of more a troubled relationship with that, then I hear where your question is coming from. So that's why I sort of a little bit soft pedaled the background story, because that isn't what the Talmudic passage is focused on. It's not really focused on the context in the book of Judges. And the way I have myself embraced this story is he's a refugee. He's the sole survivor of this city. And it's that there's, you know, for those people who know communities of Holocaust survivors, you know, you're used to hearing miracle stories, right? When I was growing up, everyone in my neighborhood had a miracle story. All my friends' parents had some miracle story. At the point I became numb to it. I thought, oh God, not another miracle story. And then when I became a young adult, I thought to myself, putz, of course they all had miracle stories. The people who don't have miracle stories are all dead. Of course, all my friends' parents had miracle stories. There were the other 6 million who didn't have miracle stories. And I thought, right. But this idea of a miracle story, right? Something inexplicable of why somebody survives. And I prefer to read the story that way rather than its context of the book of Judges, this guy who basically betrays his whole city. But just to see it, this guy, he survives for some reason. And I think that's the way the Talmud is reading it rather than looking at it in context. And he survives and he goes on to found the city of immortality. But your question is very well taken. Other people?
I was just going to raise a point about the dew, and it puts me in mind of the manna and the miracle of the manna, which fell with the dew. And so, of course, it would be the dew that's involved in the resurrection, because that's also has this miraculous quality to it, that it's somehow the manna are for the living, but you could see the dew is the kind of manna for the dead to be resurrected. There just seems to be a poetic justice to it.
It's beautiful. I mean, it's beautiful, right? What you just said is just beautiful. And I mean, the manna, as you won't be surprised to learn, is a big theme in the Zohar, right? And what is the manna? And this idea of this food coming out from the heavens. I mean, it's an amazing thing in the Bible itself. The whole theme of the manna. It's like, wow. And it really is this image of the Israelites in the desert are living in this completely different plane of existence. They're eating from the food of God. They're eating the food of the God, right? And I think that's a very, very telling thing. And actually, as you point out, in the Bible, when it talks about the manna falling, it does describe it as appearing with the dew. That is actually the way the verse says, as you point out. That's a beautiful association. I love that. I'm reading one message here in the chat from Alana. Says, I'm thinking about how the refugee has survived. In a way, he's died. He's lost himself in his whole life as he knew it, but he's sacrificed that he's given a chance to rebuild. That's a beautiful comment. And again, I when I read that story, you know, and as I say, I get somewhat detached from the specific context in Judges, I think of people I knew growing up, the parents of my friends, you know, sole survivor of families who came to America and then, you know, reconstructed their whole lives. People who lost maybe a spouse and children came to America and then married somebody else and created a new family. And astonishing that people could do that, would have that strength to do that. I don't know if I could. I mean, the people had the strength to then start over again. And what was the price and the trauma, obviously, and someone who could do that, maybe they could build a city where the angel of death would have no dominion over, to quote John Donne. And this belief that there is something in us, even those of us who haven't gone through these horrifying tragedies, something in it that we want to believe, or that we know maybe even is somehow immortal. Noah says they're being resurrected / reincarnated within one lifetime. Miraculous indeed. Yes, thank you, Noah. That's really beautiful, really beautiful, and very much in the very much in the spirit of what I'm trying to convey during this entire course. Very much in that spirit. So thank you for that. Okay, I'm going to go on because I have one more Zoharic passage that is very rich, and we may continue it next time. It's one of my currently favorite passages in the Zohar. I have many favorite passages. This is one of my many favorite passages. And this is about, again, since one of my goals in this course is to convince you that these themes, that resurrection is not just something that you don't have to worry about, it happens at the end of days. Here's the Zohar says, actually it happens every week. It's an amazing passage. Every week, the dead are resurrected. So here's the passage. And as I say, you have to like this passage because it's my favorite passage, or currently my favorite passage. Trying to get rid of these controls again. Okay. Resurrection every week, every month. Okay. The soul of a human being is called by three names: nefesh, ruach, and neshama. And these words are actually very hard to translate for people whose Hebrew isn't so good. They may all be translated as soul, and or spirit. The literal meaning doesn't differentiate them, so I try not to translate them, just to transliterate them. One possible way of translating them is nefesh is sort of the animal spirit, sort of the spirit of life that we share with animals. The ruach is spirit, literally, also could mean wind. Neshama is often translated as soul, and is the higher soul, right? And interestingly enough, in the Zohar, there's no overall name that includes all of them. So actually in this passage it says, when I say the soul of a human being is called by three names, the word in the original text is neshama. Right? There's no overall word indicating that what a human being is the conjunction of various parts. So, and actually that is actually our experience. Who are we? Well, we're a convergence of various elements. And we often talk about the need to center ourselves. Right? If you feel diffused, you feel like you need to center yourself. Maybe your whole life is a struggle to center yourself, right? To bring together your nefesh, ruach, neshama, your body, your arms, your legs, your eating, your love, your romance, your sex, your everything. You're trying to bring it all together. And it's a lifelong process. And here we're focusing on these different elements of the soul, the nefesh, ruach, and neshama. After death. All are comprised with one another, while their power appears in three places. Now, it's a little bit ambiguous in the Aramaic, but the idea is that after death, we know that after death, one way in which death is described is its disintegration. The body disintegrates. The soul or the personality seems to evaporate from the body. Whether or not you believe in the soul, the personality disappears, the body disintegrates into its component parts, right? And here we have this idea that the soul splits off into its component parts, the nefesh, ruach, and neshama, and they go to three different places, or at least their powers do, whatever that means. And it goes like this. Nefesh, which is generally viewed as the lower part of the soul, appears in the grave while the body decomposes in the dust. And she revolves in this world to be present among the living and to perceive their suffering. When they are in need, she pleads for mercy. Now, two comments about this. One is, I use the female pronoun because it turns out all three of these words take female pronouns. In Hebrew, as you may know, all nouns have gender. And these three words all take female pronouns. Actually, ruach can take a male or female pronoun. And I'm just translating it very, very literally. So the nefesh is the aspect of the soul most closely associated with the body. As I said in the Bible, animals have nefesh too. And stays in the grave, right? And then it says, when they are in need, she pleads for mercy. And the idea is, and this is described elsewhere in the Zohar in great detail, that when people go to cemeteries and they, in time of need, and they plead with their ancestors to intercede with them before God, it's really the nefesh that hears them. And then there's a long description of the nefesh going and waking up the ruach and waking up the neshama and pleading before God, right? And the nefesh is very closely associated with the body. It stays in the grave with the body until the end of days. And actually, an interesting fact is that the word nefesh in Mishnaic Hebrew can also refer to a tombstone. And it gave me, when I learned that, it gave me a whole new experience of going to a cemetery. The nefesh means the soul, the aspect of the soul that stays in the grave. It also is the tombstone, which also obviously stays in the grave with the body. We could talk about that at great length, but we're going to go on a little bit. The ruach enters the earthly garden. So there's an idea in Kabbalah that there are two gardens of Eden. There's the earthly garden, or the lower garden, which is supposed to be a place on earth somewhere, like the Garden of Eden mentioned in the Bible. And then there's a heavenly garden, upper garden. So the ruach enters the earthly garden. Now listen to this. Where she is formed into an image of the body of this world in a certain garment that she dons there. And again, this is the idea of embodiment. The nefesh is with the actual body in the grave. The ruach goes to the Garden of Eden, but she takes on a form of the body of this world. And says elsewhere, the body looks just like the body that the person had when they were alive in the world. This idea that even in the Garden of Eden, the self is embodied. There's this emphasis on embodiment. And again, this is the most mythical thing you can imagine. The idea that your spirit goes into a Garden of Eden and takes on some kind of ethereal body, and yet how contemporary. The idea of when we imagine survival after death, we have to imagine in a body because a person is an embodied being. So the ruach revels there in pleasures and delights of the radiance of the garden through this ethereal body that she acquires. And on Sabbaths, new moons, and festivals, she ascends above to the heavenly Garden of Eden, delighting there. And then, after the Sabbath is over, returns to her place in the earthly garden. What about the neshama? The neshama ascends immediately to her place in the heavenly garden, to the place from where she issued. Through her, the lamp is kindled, shining above. And I'm just going to leave that there in its poetry and not decipher it. Maybe we'll do it next time. Until this neshama ascends to be linked with her place in the heavenly garden, ruach is not crowned in the earthly garden, and nefesh does not settle in her place. As soon as this neshama ascends, all of them attain tranquility. So it's the idea that after death, the various components of human being remain linked to each other, even though they become separated. They have this intense communication, empathy with each other. If one of them is not in her place, none of them are in their places, and particularly the neshama. Until she goes into the earthly garden, into the heavenly garden, the others are unsettled and disarrayed. A mystery here for those who know the way of truth, who fear sin. When nishmata, that's just an Aramaic form of neshama, is adorned above in a holy crown in the heavenly garden, and ruach stands in supernal radiance on Sabbaths, new moons, and festivals. Okay, so now let's stop for a second. What we just learned, that on Sabbaths, new moons, and festivals, the ruach goes from the lower garden to the upper garden, and basically spends Shabbat with the neshama in the heavenly garden. Then, when Ruach, after Shabbat's over, when Ruach descends from supernal radiance to the dwelling of the earthly garden of Eden, shining and sparkling, this nefesh rises within the grave. So what's the image here? The image is that on Shabbat, the Ruach goes to visit the neshama in the upper garden, acquires all this light, goes back to the earthly garden and shines her light on the nefesh that's in the grave, that's with the body in the grave. It's kind of like when Moses comes down from Mount Sinai, he has these rays of light coming out of his face. If you remember that, it's partly why it's sometimes depicted as having horns, because what the verse actually says is this radiant light coming out of his face. That's the same word for horn. So the Ruach comes down from the heavenly garden to the earthly garden, shines her light upon her nefesh in the grave, and this gives the nefesh power to rise within the grave and materialize the image that she originally assumed in the body. Is everybody with us? All those bones in that image offer praise and glorify the Blessed Holy One, as is written, all my bones will say, Hashem, who is like you. It is not written say, but rather will say. And for people who are familiar with the Shabbat morning prayers, this is from the prayer called Nishmat, at the end of which you say, Kol atzmotai tamarna Hashem mi kamocha. All my bones will say, God who is like you. We say that every Shabbat morning. And the Zohar interprets that as referring to this weekly resurrection of the dead on Saturday night, at the end of Shabbat, when the Ruach comes back from the heavenly garden to the earthly garden, shines her light on the nefesh in the grave, and this gives the power of the nefesh to rise up, and the bones, in her bones, she materializes in the body and says, Hashem kamocha, every Saturday night. If the eye were permitted to see, it would see on the night that Sabbath departs and on the closing nights of new moons and festivals, the likeness of images above graves, glorifying and praising the Blessed Holy One. So now here you have the Zohar thirsting for this resurrection so much, for Tchiat HaMeitim so much, we can't wait to the end of days. We know that it happens every Saturday night. Because Shabbat, the Ruach gets this addition from spending it in the heavenly garden. And as a result, at Saturday night, there's this intense communication between the various components of the human being, even though they're in different places. And that enables this resurrection of this very temporary resurrection of the dead to say Hashem kamocha. Now, when I first read this passage, it really blew me away, as it has every time I've read it since then, including tonight. And I was just sure that I would find, if I did enough research, some kabbalistic ritual of going to cemeteries on Saturday night to see this. But I have not yet been able to locate one. I've done a lot of research. I've asked all kinds of experts to no avail. It's this incredible image, right? This idea that resurrection is going on all the time. Believing it not just, oh yeah, in the end of days, in a billion years, but all the time. It's, again, pervading existence so that it happens every week, at the end of every Rosh Chodesh, new moon, at the end of every festival, every Chag. It is something that they're living with this idea of resurrection. It's part of their idea, and specifically, and I'll close on this, and then I know it's 9 o'clock, and I'm willing to stay a little bit for as long as the Trisha thing stays open for questions. It's the idea of living in such a way that this idea of Tchiat HaMeitim, a resurrection, is part of your daily consciousness, not just something you vaguely might believe in or sign on the dotted line because your rabbi told you to believe in it, but something that actually informs existence. And with this idea, I know it's Saturday night, I know that in the graveyard, my parents are rising up and saying, Hashem kamocha. So somebody writes, is it the source of the custom to visit loved ones before the holidays? I don't know if it's a source, because this would suggest to visit them after the After the holidays, I don't know. I mean, I think that could be, before the holidays could be more in the original thing of the idea that asking the dead for intercession with God, which again, some Jews think is idolatry or whatever, but is certainly a very, very firmly and deeply entrenched idea and belief. And I think it's more related to that first part, where it says the nefesh stays in the grave, and when people go and ask for mercy, that's what they're really communicating with. But certainly in both senses, there's this intense sense in Jewish practice, except in the more rationalist strands, which often dominate in modern times, of this relationship to our ancestors. And so he wrote, every morning to set our souls return to us. Yes, and we did that a lot last time. Both the Modeh Ani prayer and the neshamot prayer are really both about this idea that every morning is a resurrection, in a sense. And here I really wanted to just really, as I said at the beginning, just embark together on these imaginative journeys. And what's being imagined in these very, very deeply rooted Jewish myths, going back to Talmudic times, maybe even back to Isaiah, maybe not, and then picked up by the Kabbalists later in the Middle Ages, is this idea of an embodied self, not a disembodied abstract thing, but something always an imagination of a whole self, and the whole self always involves embodiment. As Sharon asked, is the resurrection of the dead in conflict with the reincarnation? We're going to talk in the second half of this course, starting the fourth session, we're going to discuss that. And certainly there's tension. These ideas, these teachings probably come from different sources, and they're not necessarily wholly reconcilable, although the Kabbalists tried to reconcile them in various ways. So I know that it's 9:03, so thank you for attending and participating and being present. For those of you who want to leave or have to leave, hope to see you next week, same time. For anyone who wants to stay and chat, I'm happy to stay as long as Drisha feels it's appropriate to keep the window open. So let's take a deep breath. For those of you who want to ask questions, please do. And for those who have to leave, have a lovely week.
Before people leave, I just want to say thank you to everyone who has been here, who's learnt with us and made this such a special session. And thank you to everyone who's joining us on the live stream. I just want to let people know that we have lots more amazing classes here at Drisha. Tomorrow at 7:30 p.m. we have our Yiddish translation workshop with Mr. Daniel Kraft for the first time, and we have dozens more classes. You can learn more and register at 578.drisha.org. And on with the questions. Thank you very much.
Somebody says, have I been to a cemetery Mosei Shabbat? I have not. I think most cemeteries are closed at night, but I have become very, very tempted, both tempted to and reluctant to, tempted because of this story, reluctant because it seems, well, you can imagine, maybe disappointed if I don't see anything, or maybe just the power of this vision has really gripped my own imagination very, very strong, very, very strongly. Someone else said, oh, Noah says, another great comment from Noah, this sort of trickle-down resurrection on holy days seems like it could infuse people with the sensitivity to passing on holiness or its opposite to others, even in casual interactions. Yeah, that's beautiful. I love that. Oh, somebody says, the Blaviter Rebbe's kever is open 24 hours. Undoubtedly. Yeah. Other comments, questions, thoughts?
Dr. Berman, I have to leave. Jeffrey Fessel, I have to leave. I enjoyed it very much, and thank you again. I look forward to next week. I've got to leave, unfortunately, but thank you.
Okay, look forward to seeing you, Jeffrey. And if no one else has any questions, I think maybe we'll wrap it up for tonight. And again, thank you all for your presence and comments, and I hope to see you next week, same time for more resurrection before we turn to reincarnation the following week.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, everyone. Goodbye.